We are on the cusp of a nuclear war with Russia. The danger of a nuclear conflict today is greater than it has been at any time in our history. There are people who say, well, Scott, what about the Cuban Missile Crisis? The nuclear arsenals of the United States and the Soviet Union in 1962 pale in comparison to the nuclear arsenals that exist today, both in destructive power, deliverability, etc. Simply put, back then we could destroy a continent or two. Today we destroy the entire world. But the thing that's missing is that back then we were talking to our adversaries. We were having conversations. Khrushchev was speaking to Kennedy, either directly or indirectly. Ambassadors were talking to one another. Today, because of the Biden administration's orders, there is no viable dialogue with the Russian Federation as we are lurching towards a nuclear conflict, one that will destroy life as we know it on the planet. Now, we're going to get to this in just a second. I don't want to steal Dr. Postal's thunder here. But the danger is manifested in a number of ways. And one of it is the sense of helplessness we get as Americans. I don't know if you've been watching what's been happening in Washington, D.C. lately. On November 20th, there was a gathering by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. They invited Rear Admiral Thomas Buchanan. He's the J5, Director of Plans and Operations for the Strategic Command. That is the combatant command that does nuclear war fighting. They're the ones ready to fight the war. And he gave a keynote address, but he also answered questions. And I believe it was the second question asked by the moderator dealt with the risk of nuclear war. And he, of course, started off with the standard, nobody wants to fight a nuclear war, right? Nobody wants to fight it. But he's the guy who writes the nuclear war plan. And then he turned around and he said, but we are ready to fight a nuclear war. We are ready to engage with the Russians in a nuclear exchange, he called it, as if that somehow diminished this destructive reality of a nuclear war. But that's not the part that scared me, because every iteration of strategic command in the history of the nuclear force of the United States has been prepared to fight a nuclear war. That's their job. They're prepared to fight it. But if you recall back in Ronald Reagan, when they were talking, when he was talking with Gorbachev, they agreed that nuclear wars cannot be won. Therefore, they should never be fought. So what Rear Admiral Buchanan said afterwards is not only that the United States is prepared to fight a nuclear war, they are prepared to win a nuclear war. And the methodology of victory, while vague, was that we would, after we won, prevailed in this nuclear conflict, we would retain sufficient nuclear weapons capacity so that we could deter other nuclear adversaries. In this day and age of nuclear parity, where the last remaining arms control treaty, New START, gives roughly 1,550 nuclear deliverable systems to each side, how do you win a war? He said, you don't want to use all your nuclear weapons to win. You have to have some left over. But if you have some left over, how do you destroy much with reduced? And the answer is in the plans that he has written. Nuclear preemption, the preemptive use of nuclear power, so that we can maximize destructive capacity, eliminate as much of the retaliatory capacity of the enemy, and still retain sufficient nuclear strike capability to deter other people. Nuclear preemption. It is part of the Biden administration's nuclear posture, which was published in 2022, and it's been incorporated in the latest iteration of the Presidential Nuclear Employment Guidance. That is, telling Strategic Command how to fight the war. We're going to nuke you first. But you know that. That's why you're so upset with what's going on with the ATACMS missiles. ATACMS is not a nuclear-capable missile. It's a tactical missile. It's an American-made system that's been provided to the Ukrainians, and Ukrainians have used it to attack targets inside Russia. The problem is Ukraine can't do that on their own. In order to do these targeting, the Ukraine has to receive intelligence information from the United States that's put together by specific targeting teams within the Department of Defense. That means that we are planning the attack against Russia. Then we have to provide the communications capacity so that the system can guide itself to the target and communicate with satellites. Again, American satellites, American guidance, American encryption. It's an American missile being facilitated for its launch by the United States of America. And the only thing Ukrainian about is the finger that pushes the launch button. And the Russians have rightfully said that this constitutes an act of war against Russia. Legally, it does. One other thing I want to leave you right now, whether it's official or not, America is at war with Russia. We are fighting a hot war with Russia as we speak, because ATACMS missiles are being launched against Russia, and that can't happen without American permission and American facilitation. Now, why would the Russians equate that danger to something that could lead to a nuclear war? Because preemption. One of the concerns that the Russians have is that the United States and NATO will initiate strategic preemption with conventional preemption. That is, to use conventional weapons like ATACMS, Storm Shadow, Scalp, to initiate an attack, follow that up with a nuclear preemptive attack to decapitate Russian capabilities. So every time we fire an ATACMS missile, the Russians have to say, is this it? Has the balloon gone up? And so they have adjusted their nuclear posture to lower the threshold so that they say, if a nuclear power provides conventional strike capability to a non-nuclear power, and that non-nuclear power uses that to strike Russia, that meets the threshold requirement for Russian release of nuclear weapons in response. But the Russian nuclear planners also have to say, if America is getting ready to launch a nuclear preemptive attack against us, the only way we can prevail is to preempt the preemption, which means they have to be prepared to launch a nuclear preemptive attack. And that's where we are today, ladies and gentlemen.